I had no idea what the word philosophy even meant before taking Introduction to Philosophy as a requirement for my undergraduate degree. I had no inkling either what a valuable part of my life it would become. But over the past roughly 45 years since then, philosophy has become the means through which I process my thoughts and experiences. It is also what has most shaped who I have become and who I am becoming. Very becoming of me, isn't it? So this doesn't mean that I can quote most philosophers and explain their basic ideas. I can't. Philosophy isn't about explaining the ideas of others, but about how to best process our own. It's not about memorizing proverbs and anecdotes to live by, but about how to make the best decisions on our own. And that is why what philosophy means. As you have heard, thank you for stealing my thunder. No, I'm teasing. As you heard from Dick, the Greek word, philosophia. By the way, there was a visitor here the first service who came just for the sermon and actually had the Greek word philosophia on his forearm. Yeah. And of course, as Dick said, it translates into love, phileo, sophia, wisdom. And wisdom isn't knowledge, it's understanding how best to apply what we know to our lives. Wisdom is what we do with our knowledge. So I was enrolled in the Bible department at Howard Payne University at the time, a Southern Baptist liberal arts college, and went there feeling certain that I had already had the best and wisest ideas already figured out. But just a few weeks into that course, and I realized I couldn't know anything for certain. I couldn't even be sure of the ground beneath my feet. Epistemology, that's the study of knowing, of how we know. It's a major area of philosophy that shows us that we really can't know anything for certain. Ultimately, that's what it shows us. It's quite simple if you think about it. There are relatively few avenues to knowledge, right? When we say, this is why I know something, and those are reason, sensation, experience, authority, intuition, or faith, all of which can be shown to be faulty at least sometimes. So philosophy thus ends up making us dubious of everything. And as a young college student who believed that I would only have the truth that I already believed in confirmed, learning that I couldn't be sure of anything was a shock, let me tell you. But if philosophy, Introduction to Philosophy 1, introduced all of those annoying questions, I mistakenly reasoned that Introduction to Philosophy 2 would provide all the answers. So even though it wasn't a prerequisite, I elected to take Intro 2, expecting to learn how to know what is true and real with certainty. And midway through that semester, while learning about Plato's idealism, I thought I had finally figured it out. And upon bumping into my philosophy professor, Dr. Wallace Roark, in the hallway, I seized the opportunity to put that assumption to the test. I told him what I understood about Plato's ideas, to which he nodded approvingly and repeatedly, yes, yes, yes. And I felt waves of reassurance and relief, and finally concluded that my brief lecture to him, my professor, by asking, so that's how we know the truth. Dr. Roark appeared dumbfounded, as if he were struggling to find the right response. No! He finally uttered, and that was it. And I was as surprised by his response as he was apparently by my question. And during those few nanoseconds, you know how you can think so much in so short a period of time, I tried to process what was happening. No? No? How can it be no? I thought idealism, if it's not idealism, I thought, then how do we know anything for certain? And I thought all of this and more during the immediate and really devastating aftermath of Roark's bewildering renunciation. And most importantly, I came to the sudden realization. It's like, oh, there's not going to be any answer. And that's why Dr. Roark was so flabbergasted, because he had no idea how best to respond to my assumption that there would be, to my need, my obvious need for the certainty that he understood would never come. And that was the moment that I got my answer. That's the moment I understood what had just happened, that there was never going to be an answer. There was no answer. And that was the moment that changed my life. It was for a while a difficult and depressing realization. Although I was far from suicidal, like any good philosopher or budding philosopher as I was in that case, I began questioning the meaning of life itself. Looking back, I can describe what followed as a period of existential angst, because I was looking ahead to a life without understanding or meaning. And none of my friends thought as deeply about such matters as me. They were all from the Bible Belt. I wasn't, so my questions, my certainties weren't quite as absolute, perhaps, as some of theirs were. But I didn't have anyone to talk seriously with about what I was going through, although I often tried. So one day, while attempting to talk philosophy with my friend Marty Gray, a business student, I decried, without meaning, what's the point of living? That's true, he grinned, but what's the point of dying? Now, he didn't realize how profoundly his smart alecky statement impacted me. It was another key realization in my early philosophical journey that enabled me to immediately trade that dark existential angst with an optimistic view of life. He's right. I might not know the truth, I thought, but if living and dying are equally as meaningless, I might as well live. At least living is something, and I can enjoy it. So, even if life has no grander purpose, it was something I thought I could at least enjoy. And what I seemed to enjoy most was searching for understanding. So I decided to major in philosophy. And for a while, I was the only philosophy major at our small university. And about a year after my philosophical journey began, another shift occurred. I realized, rather than detracting from life and meaning, that living in a state of doubt made my life far more enjoyable than those false feelings of certainty ever had. Being certain makes life dull and boring, but the uncertainty turns it into an endless adventure by opening us to mystery and to wonder and to curiosity and to discovery. And that's what philosophy very quickly turned me into, a lifelong learner who is always seeking to understand more and who is always growing and changing and becoming in the process. So upon graduating from college, I realized that there wasn't much of a demand for philosophers anymore. The bottom of the market fell out about 2,000 years ago. So I returned to college for a year, this time at a Catholic university in Louisville, Kentucky, and earned a second bachelor's in communications, which led to a 16-year career in television news and corporate video production. And then I was in my late 30s when I earned my Master's of Arts in Religious Studies and received my doctorate at age 48. Talk about a lifelong learner. And I did learn a lot in the process, but these other degrees were mostly credentials. Like what one of my professors, my doctoral professors, said first day of class. He said, the education is free, degrees cost money. And although I never worked as a professional philosopher, in some way I do. I mean, I feel like that's what I'm doing each Sunday here, so. But academically, that's pretty much the only place philosophers can get work as philosophers anymore. But anyway, even though I've never been, an academic philosopher, a professional philosopher, I consider myself to have graduated from HPU as a philosopher. And that is what I have remained ever since. That's what I became through my education. By the way, I just have to comment, HPU, if you remember the old Looney Tunes cartoons, anytime somebody went to a college, it always ended with the letters PU, right? PU. So I just thought it was fun that I ended up going to a college, HPU. Anyway, just my luck. It was a really good school. I got a lot of growth out of that. It was a Baptist college, but liberal arts. So metaphysics is another additional area of philosophy. It focuses on the underlying nature of reality. Right? Epistemology, truth; metaphysics, reality. So Plato's philosophy of idealism, for example, is one such explanation, the idea that whatever is real exists in a realm of perfect forms, of which everything in our physical reality is but an imperfect reflection. That's a metaphysic. Idealism has broadened a lot since Plato to include beliefs that reality consists of what some might call mind or spirit or consciousness, and that physical reality is but an illusion. Materialism is almost the opposite of idealism. It holds that reality is entirely physical, including mind and thought, which are products of the brain. And I'm not going to go much into the mind-body problem, but you pretty much have to believe one or the other. They don't work together. They both can't be true, because how can there be both mind and body if they don't interact, and how can they interact if they're not the same? That's kind of the argument. So, materialism is closely related to empiricism, which argues that knowledge is derived from our senses, from what we sense of the world, right? Sight, sound, touch. And rationalism, which insists that it must also come from reason and logic, right? How do we interpret the impressions that we gain from sensation? So logic helps us sort of make sense of it, right? If you can think of our senses as groping in the darkness, and then the senses give us reason to try to figure out what it is we are sensing, logic can help us determine that to some extent. And then there are other metaphysics that I won't mention. Dick actually mentions some of them. Rather than with the exception of idealism, which I do not accept, I've mentioned those that I lean toward. those philosophical arguments that say that reality is physical and it is independent of what we think, right? Whatever is real, whether I believe it or not. And that we can best comprehend what little we can of it through our physical senses, especially through the use of science and through reason and logic. It's the way I lean. Anyone familiar with my Sunday messages will recognize how this approach to understanding reality has shaped my thinking on almost everything. But the point not to lose is that my approach to metaphysics is the same approach I've taken toward knowledge or truth ever since completing my Introduction to Philosophy courses more than 40 years ago. Just as I have learned to question everything others believe, and more importantly, everything I believe is true, I also question everything others believe and everything that I believe is real. And when it comes to the nature of reality, I've come to believe, as I said, that it's physical and that it can be explored and understood through reason and through the senses. But I also realize that I could be wrong. And I believe, to some extent, I must be wrong. As Dr. Roark frequently said, no human statement is ever adequate, never finished. And this to me suggests that even what we might get right about reality is not entirely right. The same is true of our perceptions of the world, which are ultimately subjective interpretations of our own experiences. So once again, the study of metaphysics hasn't helped me better grasp the nature of reality, but has instead caused me to feel more uncertain about my interpretations of it. It has forced me, that is, to further recognize that in order to be honest with myself, I must face the world and everything in it with a large degree of doubt. Again, those who know me well and often hear me speak also know how much I value and rely upon logic. But those untrained in this branch of philosophy often consider it a device for determining if something is true or not. But shaping an argument into sound logical form, then assume one can conclude it must be true, cannot be farther from the truth. Proper logical form only helps us determine if an argument is valid, meaning that all of its terms are in proper place in relationship that don't violate the rules of logic. Logic is only concerned with proper form, not truth. Logic is not about discovering the truth. It's about discovering, am I thinking well? So, for example, Hillary Clinton is the first woman U.S. president. Bill Clinton is married to Hillary Clinton. Therefore, Bill Clinton is married to the first woman U.S. president. And this is a perfectly logical argument. But obviously it is untrue because Hillary Clinton is not the first woman president, sadly, in my humble opinion. So sound arguments built upon true statements can help us feel more confident about our beliefs, but not entirely. Why? Because, as noted, we cannot know anything with absolute certainty because truth is not a logical problem. It is an epistemological problem, which means we must even doubt the conclusions that logic leads us to. Ethics is another branch of philosophy that has been crucial in shaping my mindset and worldview. As many of you know, it's also a subject that I frequently return to in my sermons. In brief, you might recall, there are three approaches to understanding ethics. The difference, that is, between good and evil, or to use a colloquialism, between right and wrong. Rule-based ethics considers good and evil to be ontological realities that are true in all circumstances, regardless of the outcome or situation. It therefore suggests that there are certain rules that we must always live by, no matter the consequences, like thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not lie, and as we were taught at my Baptist college, thou shalt always take thy cap off indoors. It was really a problem, for us young people, because we had hair back in those days. We'd get up and go have breakfast, and we couldn't wear our caps. I got in trouble more than once for that. So the problem with this ethic really is that sometimes strictly following the rules leads to what many of us would consider terrible injustices, right? The rules justify a lot of terrors like segregation and discrimination and even racism. Outcome-based ethics is number 2. Determines good and evil based upon the consequences of our rules and our actions. So if one must steal medicine, for example, to save a dying person, they are ethically correct, regardless of what the law says. Most of us would agree. On the other hand, when the ends justify the means can become unimportant. How we get there can become unimportant. The outcome ends up justifying all sorts of means. And that also has led to a lot of injustices. So value-based ethics is the third, which is what I favor, and it's a more balanced approach rather than basing right and wrong on either rules or outcomes. It relies on universal principles and values that are broad, but ought to be adhered to in any situation. So Immanuel Kant's famous categorical imperative, right? That's what the word categorical means. It's good in all situations and circumstances. And that, as you've heard me often say, is never treat others as a means to one's own end, but consider them an end within themselves. So it's not a hard rule, but it is a principled approach to any situation that allows us to be flexible in how we execute it. But this isn't really about giving you an ethics lesson. I really offered the briefest explanation of the subject that I could to show that philosophy has even taught me that I must doubt my beliefs about something so essential is knowing the difference between right and wrong. But difficult as that is, just think about some of the people in the world you wish would reconsider their beliefs about right and wrong. I won't name any names. And there are a couple other branches of philosophy that I really never paid much attention to, just because of my disposition. One is aesthetics, the nature of beauty and art, and political philosophy, the study of justice and governance. Beauty, as the saying goes, is in the eye of the beholder, and politics, well, that word says it all. So it seems pretty clear that we ought to acknowledge the subjective and dubious nature of our personal beliefs about art and politics, at least as much as we should in the areas of truth, reality, ethics, and reason. So thus, as I have indicated all along, philosophy has not shaped my mind by filling it with knowledge, but at every turn by filling it with doubt. Not a melancholy or cynical kind of doubt, but the kind of doubt that leads to wonder and to curiosity. Freudian psychoanalyst Theodore Reich once wrote that the capacity to doubt, and in particular the ability to endure doubt for a long time, is one of the rarest things on this planet. And social psychologist Erich Fromm said similarly, the compulsive quest for certainty is not the expression of genuine faith, but is rooted in the need to conquer the unbearable doubt. But the philosopher's experience of doubt is far different than it is for most. For us, the capacity to doubt is neither rare nor unbearable. It is not only the first step in philosophizing, but it becomes the lens through which we view the world and ourselves, and is the primary means by which we live, in which we love our lives. Professional philosophers may select particular branches of philosophy to specialize in, or particular philosophies to become philosophers to become experts on, but their specialties and their expertise is not what makes them philosophers. It is their capacity to doubt for a very, very, very long time, throughout their entire lives. And to not only bear it, but to cherish the ability and opportunity to do so. Such a life is filled with a deeper kind of understanding than the false sense of certainty so many others crave can offer, and also fills our moments in this world with unceasing curiosity and wonder. In this way, philosophers are akin to those apophatic mystics which arrive at understanding by continuously letting go of what they think they know. They have learned to feel most at home when they are living in the mist or in the mystery of life. Yet they are not ignorant people. They are always searching for truth. The search is what makes life worth living for both mystics and philosophers. But both are also a little disappointed should they somehow stumble upon a potential answer. I mean, what fun is there in that? No bother if they do, really, because whatever the answer might be, surely it is worthy of doubt, and the chase begins again. The difference is that mystics mostly seek knowledge about God, yet realize, as the Kabbalah says, for example, with every increase in the negations regarding God, you come nearer to the apprehension of God. Or as St. Denis said, the most divine knowledge of God is that which is known by not knowing. And St. John of the Cross said, the soul travels to God not knowing rather than knowing. Philosophers realize the same is true of knowledge itself. As philosopher James Carse puts it, knowing that we don't know is not only a higher ignorance, it is the basis of all our hope. As a result of all this doubt, philosophers are naturally humble about their ideas. They're often eager to share what they believe might be true, along with why they believe that it might be so. And if you meet a philosopher who tells you what they believe but not why they believe it, they're not much of a philosopher. But they will not defend their ideas, not with the intolerance of ordinary souls who often defensively cling to their poorly substantiated beliefs with ferocity. Philosophers are seldom in the mood to waste much time trying to convince others that they are right. After all, they already know they may be wrong. They're willing to share their ideas with those interested, but are just as willing to remain silent or to walk away. Philosophy is about the pursuit of even greater understanding, not about being right. So that is how philosophy has shaped how I think, and more importantly, how I live my life. It has conditioned me to live, including when making difficult choices and while judging the choices of others, to live in a chronic state of doubt and uncertainty. It has conditioned me to experience uncertainty with optimism, joy, wonder, and sometimes awe, and it keeps me humble. So perhaps you are among those who have tried to study philosophy, only to soon find your eyelids drooping and your bored mind struggling to understand what the hell you just read 3 times. If we think of philosophy as no more than a very large collection of complicated to very wacky ideas, then it does quickly become too much for us. But if we come to see it as a way to process whatever we read or think or experience, then it becomes far more interesting and, from my perspective, incredibly valuable for all of us. Philosophy isn't knowledge, it's practice. So transform your doubts into awe and wonder. Replace your false certainties with real humility. And may your search for truth and understanding never be complete, so that you may enjoy a long and happy life. For as a great philosopher once said, life may have no meaning, but what's the point in dying? Thank you.